Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Get Your Users Building Applications on SharePoint with Access Services session. My name is Johanna White, and I am a Senior Product Manager on SharePoint, focusing on Access Services, BCS, InfoPath Forum Services, and Visio Services. I just joined the team a few months ago, so I'm relatively new to this role. My previous role involved working with developers, and in my pre-Microsoft days, I was an IT consultant, first as a Java and VB developer, and then later as a business analyst.
My name is Ryan McMinn, and I'm a program manager on the Access team. Before Microsoft, I spent 6 years running a business building Access and web applications, and before that managed the IT department for a record label. So I've seen things from both sides. During that time, I saw a pattern emerge that seems to have been amplified in the past couple of years. More demands, fewer resources. Most IT teams I worked with had long backlogs and were at full capacity. You know, we always used to play a game when we'd see people at lunch in the financial district in Toronto, where I'm from. We'd try to spot the IT professional. And it would be someone that looked pretty much like us, except they had their hands clutched to a BlackBerry or a phone, waiting that call that would spell disaster.
So, all of this, along with the fact that regulatory and privacy concerns are only going to become more business critical, I can understand why you might feel under a little bit of pressure. I wish I could make a list of all the challenges you face and then help you overcome them. I also wish I could vacation on my own island. Since I can't do either, I have something to show you that hopefully will solve at least some of your problems at work and reduce the pressure you face every day. By the time Ryan and I are finished, you should know that building web apps doesn't require writing code. In fact, it doesn't have to be difficult or time-consuming at all. Useful, rich, data-driven web apps can be built rapidly in Access without code, increasing user and department satisfaction while allowing you to focus on high-priority projects and maintaining a stable infrastructure. You can free up more resources since Access web databases can be maintained, tweaked, and customized by business users. Access Services will let you do more with less, and since it's built on SharePoint, you can maintain a manageable platform and predictable service levels, simplifying operations with a single unified platform for all solutions, whether created by business users, business units, or corporate IT. Most Access databases start off with someone saying, there must be a better way. I want to tell you a story about Aaron and his Legos. Aaron is the son of one of our testers, Jeff. Aaron is absolutely fanatical about Legos, especially Star Wars Legos. He has literally hundreds of sets and thousands of pieces of Legos. One Saturday morning, Jeff came downstairs to find Aaron with all of his Legos spread out across the floor and surrounded by bunches of notepaper. "Aaron, what are you doing?" Jeff asked. Aaron replied, "I'm trying to organize all my Legos so I know what sets I have, and that way I don't keep getting the same sets for Christmas and my birthday." At this point, Jeff, with deep pride, said, "Son, I think you are old enough now to learn about relational databases." So Aaron spent the day building a database to track his Legos and published it to the web so his family could see what sets he has. So let's take a look at what we have. As you can see, it's a great list of all of the Legos he has. There are pictures included. You can click and see detailed information about each piece. You can also see the full list of Legos. We brought the continuous form to the browser with inline pictures. There's also the data sheet where sorting and filtering works, and we can look at the filtering on one of the years here. Here's the data sheet. Do the sort here. Choose 2000. Oh, it's only one in 2000. Flash speeder. Okay, and then there's also, he built a report so again, if family and friends go in here and try and figure out what to get him for his birthday, they know exactly which ones he has and they don't duplicate his collection, because clearly that's very important to him. So, why do you guys care about Legos? Well, like I said, this web database was built in one afternoon by a 14-year-old. Okay, with some help from his father. As you can see, it's a rich UI with logic, easy to share with others for collaboration, and managed inside SharePoint. We're going to show you how you can build this type of web database rapidly in Access and do it collaboratively with your business users, and then also publish it to SharePoint so that you can manage your applications and data centrally.
Cool. So I'm going to play the role of the IT guy, and Joanna's going to be the business user who's going to come with a request to build a sales tracking database for the holidays. Now, normally this is the kind of database that I just don't have the resources to help her with because it would be too time-consuming and I've got a lot of other stuff on my plate. But I'm going to try it in Access and see how far we get.
I found a template online, but I still need a UI and some forms for the database.
So this is the getting started experience of Access 2010. We made a big bet on templates in 2007, and we've really kind of ratcheted that up for this release. But we're now allowing community templates, templates that users upload to Office Online, to come directly into the Access Create experience. So your users will have access to all the templates that are uploaded to Office Online by the community and have a great, rich way to get started without having to start from scratch. And really, starting from something is one of the key goals in Access. We want to make it so people don't have to get a blank screen. They can really get something to get going with. So here we can pick our sales web database that Joanna found for us, and we can create it. Now notice in here we've got a few items down the left-hand side of our navigation pane, but not a lot of UI to navigate around stuff.
That looks great. So now I want to view the details for my customers from the screen. Can we do that?
Yes, we can. All right. So a lot of Access developers, or developers in general, will find that they do the same things over and over again. They create the same kinds of forms, the same kinds of reports, and there's a lot of duplicate effort every single time. So in 2010, we've allowed you, through application parts, to save parts of your application and reuse those in different kinds of databases. So now once you build that form the way you want it once, you can reuse that everywhere. In this case, we're going to use a list form. We brought it in here, and we'll give it a better name. Open it in layout view. Can you see the, yeah, you can see it better up here than I can on my screen. So now you can see we've got a form, and we've got a bunch of stuff in it already. So we're not completely from scratch. We have an edit button, a delete button. We have some kind of stuff we can work with. So let's bind this form up to some data for our customers. And let's bring some data in. So we can bring in our full name, bring in the phone number. And you see we're getting a live data preview. It's one of the great things with the Access Form Designer is you can preview your data in real time. So when you're resizing or tweaking forms, you can see what the data looks like in line. You don't have to flip back and forth between a design and a runtime view. In this case, we want to make it look a little nicer, so we're going to add pictures. So we're going to go to our attachment field, and we're going to bring that in as well. Great. And I like formatting a certain way, so I'm going to go in and remove some of the outlines. Give this a better name. So that's how easy it is to build a simple form to be able to look at records in a table. One of the other challenges with Access is how do you tie together the disparate things in your navigation pane into a cohesive user experience? Now, you don't really want people to go through using this because a lot of times there's things in the navigation pane that they don't really need to work with. So in previous releases, we had a switchboard manager that you could kind of build up. But we've really seen the interface that people are kind of expecting and used to change to be more of a tab-style, web-based navigation. We want to bring that to Access in a really easy way. So we created something called the navigation control. So when I create a tab, I can pick navigation controllers. And I have a few different options for different styles of navigation that we kind of saw common patterns in the web. In this case, I'm going to choose horizontal tabs, 2 levels. I can customize this, give my database a name. Great. And now, in order to add things to this surface, all I need to do is drag and drop them from the navigation pane. So the form we made customers, we can drag that up and drop it. We can also bring in our sales information as well as our users information. And we'll save that and call it home. We can close our field list and view it. And now we've got a quick and easy way to navigate through our database without having to write any code or do a lot of work.
And it's a very kind of modern looking UI. If you've used Access before, you'll notice there's a lot of improvements we made in Access in terms of how the buttons look, how the tabs look, how the forms look, to make them more modern, more fresh, and more like the web.
So that's good, but I need to be able to share this with my team.
Well, first we should go through and we'll do the logic.
Okay.
So one of the challenges we have here is we have a list of people. We now want to drill in on the details of those people. Traditionally, a lot of times we do that in VBA. And we made a big investment in this release in the macro engine to make it more flexible and more expressive. In 2010, we had the ability to do error trapping, some basic if statements, and some global variables. In 2010, we've added a new design surface, full if statements with else and else if, as well as local variables, groups, and a bunch of other cool stuff. So I'm going to go into my layout view, click on my edit button, and then go build an event. So this is the new macro canvas. It was really designed to be a mix of a declarative editor, but still have the look and feel of code to give you an easy readability. So we have an action catalog down the right-hand side. If you're not sure what you want to use, you can kind of navigate through and see the different options that you have. In this case, we know we want to work with a form to open a form, so we can just search for form, and we get all of our form actions. And I can double-click or drag this in, and it automatically appears for me on the canvas. And now it tells me exactly what I need to do to fill this out. All the fields are there for me. So I want to go to get our customer details, and I want to open it in a dialog view. But I want to make sure when I open that details form, I'm only opening it to the one record that I selected, not all of them. So I can set a temporary variable to capture the record I'm on and then use that to filter down the form. So I'm going to set a temp var. I'm going to call it current ID. And I want it to equal to the ID field in my table. So you see when I start typing, we get IntelliSense and expressions. We found in previous releases of Access that the expression language was tough to really learn and get used to as an end user or even as a developer. So we built in IntelliSense in all the areas where we have expressions in order to make it easier for you to do the right thing the first time. In this case, we want the ID field. So we can just tab off of that, save it, move that to the top. And so that will basically get us our current ID, open the form. We also want to do a couple other things to make this a little more robust. The form we were on before, you could edit that form. So we want to make sure that if you've made an edit to that form, when you open up the details, that edit is saved and committed and comes into the detail record. So to do that, we can add an if statement. So we can drag in our if statement to the top. And, oh, there you go, to the top. Great. And we can say if the form we are on is dirty, so if it's been changed, we're going to save the record first. And in the same way, once we open up and make changes to that details record, when we come back to our main list again, we want to make sure that those updates go all the way through. So at the bottom of this, we can add a refresh record action. And this is a new action in Access 2010 that only targets the one record you're looking at. Previously, you'd have to refresh the entire record set to get the updates. Now you can really target just the one record you want to change. So let's save that and try it out. So now when I click on Larry, oh, I know what I missed. Great. So once we set that temporary variable, we have to set it in the where condition. So when we open up the form, we want to say, open up this form where the current ID equals that temporary variable. So we'll bring in our ID field, and we'll say equals temp vars. Great. Now we get Larry. So when we go in and we change Larry's information, add an S to his name, and save it, it updates here in the background. So very easily, we've written some logic that kind of ties together our application in a few clicks.
Great. So now I need to keep track of how much money each customer has paid thus far on the main screen. Can we do that?
Yes, we can totally do that. So one of the other constructs we added in terms of macros is the new feature called data macros. And data macros have a couple goals. One of them is to centralize where you keep your logic in your application. Traditionally, we'd see a lot of developers building stuff at the form level in VBA. So the code wasn't as reusable as it could have been, as every time you make a new form, you have to go repeat a lot of that work to make sure those business rules are applied. Data macros allow you to take macro logic and apply it at the table level. So no matter what form or data sheet interacts with that data, all the rules are followed and the actions are taken. really lets you centralize that. And with data macros, we're really looking for a way to build business-level logic that we could move up to the server and run inside SharePoint. So with the challenge of VBA is because it's code, moving to the server has a lot of issues around permissions and the high level you need in SharePoint in order to run code or execute code or install it on the server. And we wanted no-code solutions, the ability for people at a contributor level to be able to work with these databases, and people at a designer level to be able to publish them. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a total for how much our customers have paid us. So the first thing we need to do is put in a field to store that information. So in our customer table, we can go in and add a field through the ribbon. We can add a currency field. It's very easy with the layout, design view, and access for tables to quickly build tables in a preview mode. So I add currency, and I can call this sales total. I'll put in some sample data there for us. Close it. And now I want this to appear in my form so we can look at it later. So I will go to Add Existing Fields, and there it is, and we can bring that in. And I'll format that quickly. Great. So we can open up our sales table, and this is the table we want the action to take place on. So we want, every time someone clicks that paid button, we want to go increment the sales total in the other table with the latest total. And this way, we put the code in one place, and no matter who touches this table, it'll always keep updating that total. And one of the reasons we do aggregates this way is when you move it up to the server, it's much more performant to not have to do the joins. So every time you can avoid doing a join and keep some data in a centralized table, it allows you to render the forms much quickly and have less stress on the server. So in our table, we can go to our table chunk in the tools, and we see we have a bunch of options here now for actions. We have before events, like before change and before delete. And that allows us to make sure the data is the way we want it before it goes into the database. And we have after events, like after insert, after update, and after delete. The same thing. We can do logging, or we can take actions on other lists based on stuff that's happened in this list. And we also have a construct called name macros, which is pretty cool. And they're not attached to an actual event, but you can call them from a UI macro and go to a data level operation, and I'll show you a couple of what those are. So we're going to do an after update. So here we get the macro designer comes up, except the actions along the side now are different than they were in the UI macros. Now we have data level things, like create record, edit record, the ability to go through, loop through records for each record or look up records. And we have record style actions to do, edit records and change them. So I'm going to grab a sample bit of code, and it's just standard XML. So all of our UI macros and data macros are all XML, which allows you to easily copy and paste from the designer. You can email it to somebody, you can share macros and code this way. So when I paste that XML in, it comes in the design view already. And this is a pretty basic macro. It says, hey, if I've changed that paid table, if it's updated and it's set to true, go increment my total. If I've updated it and it's set to false, go take that away. So now when I go back to my UI, and I go to sales, and I say, oh, okay, great, Larry came and paid us $1,900. When I go back, Larry's updated to $1,900. So I did that through a different form, not through the table. No matter where I change that data, it'll automatically update. And the same way, I can go back to sales, and I can say, oh, it turns out that you didn't pay, and that gets taken out of the total as well. So it's very easy to build data-level logic that works across all of your forms with data macros and access.
Great. But our company colors are actually green, not blue. Can we update that?
We totally can. So one of the challenges with access, and I know this from spending years developing it, is that because every form is its own little thing, when you need to make changes near the end of a project, it's very difficult to change colors. You've got to go through every single form, every single report, and tweak all this stuff. It's very time-consuming. So we wanted to make that easier in 2010, so we integrated with standard Office themes. So now you can apply the standard theme you make in PowerPoint, or even the SharePoint theme of your company, to your Access databases in a couple clicks. In this case, we can go into themes, and we can say, okay, our company colors are green. We can change our fonts and save that. And now every form will inherit those settings. So all of our forms, all of our reports will automatically get those things. These are data sheets that don't show as much. So you have the ability to override this as well, but you can, if you use the default settings, it gives you a great way to change your app on the fly and really save a lot of time working with it.
Okay. Now can we share it with my sales team?
Okay, great. So now we want to share it with the sales team. We want to put it up on a SharePoint. So I'm going to set a startup form quickly so that it looks nice once it goes up there. So we can go to our backstage and we can say published access services. We can give it a URL. We can click from the picker so it'll remember your recent locations, and we can give it a name, demo, and then we can click the publish button. So what's happening here is very different than the way we used to work with SharePoint in 2007, where we'd allow you to move your list to SharePoint, but still keep your database in an ACCDB living in the client. Now we're making the full transformation, where all your lists are getting turned into standard SharePoint lists and the data is getting moved up. All of your forms are getting turned into ASPX pages that run in the browser. All of the UI macros that we created earlier get turned into JavaScript and attached to those forms. The data macro we made becomes a SharePoint workflow that will run and execute on the server. So all of your application definition is now moved inside of SharePoint, where you manage not only the data, but also the application. So if you make changes to the application, that is instantly deployed to all the users through the browser or through the client. And this application will run just as good on the browser as it is in the client, which allows you the ability to take it offline or do different kinds of work with it. So now that it's published, we can go take a look at it in the browser. And great, there's our application now running fully in the browser. We don't do anything fancy or special with ActiveX. It's just standard XHTML and CSS and JavaScript. So this will run and look the same way in Firefox and Safari, in Internet Explorer, whether you're on a Mac, a PC, or in Linux. And we still have all of our actions that we had before. So I can go into Richard, and I get my pop-up form popping up, and I can go in and change his last name. And that record will update there on the fly. So that's how easy it is to publish it up in a SharePoint. Now we can manage and really control that application.
Great. So I've been using this database for a while now, and it's been wonderful, but my boss just came and asked me for a report on the status of our campaigns. And he needs it tomorrow morning for his all hands. So can you get me the report?
Now, this is one of the things that I saw a lot, is not having the time to do this kind of tweaking for somebody, where in Access you really have the ability to allow people to tweak things themselves, but being an IT professional, you don't have the time to go adjust reports every time someone needs something for tomorrow. And they never ever need it for 2 weeks from now, or a month from now, or 6 months from now. It's always now. That's the point that they need it. And you don't want to look like the bottleneck or the reason that they can't get their job done, but at the end of the day, you just don't have the time to do it. So I'm going to walk Joanna through building the report herself, so that once she learns, she can go do it over and over again without having to have me come and do it every single time. So let's try that out. We can just open it right from the browser. So we can go to our options screen, which gives us a bunch of options, and we can open up in Access. So now what we're doing is the server is now synchronizing all of that database back to the client. So now it's running fully in the client and connected to the server. So the first thing we can make is a query. And this is the standard Access query engine. This hasn't changed a lot. We can bring in customers and we can bring in sales. You notice the relationships appear automatically for us, which is great in Access. You don't have to go make those or keep making them every single time. From the sales, we can bring in paid and we can bring in amount. And from customers, we can bring in the full name. And since we only are interested in people that have paid us, we can easily, with the expressions, mark in true in the paid field. And we save that out. Great. Now, before we make the report, we should open up the sales table and mark some of those people as paid. Otherwise, we're not going to have a very nice looking report. You see we get the theme inheritance here. We're paying the theme. It gives you a very easy way to tell your alternate row colors in the case of this theme. Great. So now we can build a quick report if we select that query on top of that query. And Access has a great reporting engine to quickly build queries, or build reports, so you don't have to start from scratch. So here we have a kind of nice formatted report already. We can just go do a bit of cleanup work to get it the way we want it. So we can delete paid, because we don't need the paid field. We already know that it's only people that have paid. We don't need to see everybody twice, so we can actually go group on full name. and that'll give us an easy way to start grouping this report. In the same way with the amounts. We're only interested in the total they paid us, not each individual line item. And then we can hide the details to shrink it down a little bit, and even move that total up into the top and delete the extra cell to get some more space. So in a few clicks, we have a nice, simple summary report of who has paid us. And to make it a little bit nicer, we can add some conditional formatting. So we can say, hey, the people that have paid us more than $1,000, they're really special. We want to highlight those people out and really call them out. And in Access 2010, you now have the ability to do 50 conditional formatting rules. Previously, you could only do 3, so we've really extended that out. Great. So we can save and close that. So now we have the report. How do we add that to our UI? So we can open up our home form and layout view, and we want to add it to our sales section. So we can actually drag and drop it now to the second level of that navigation. And that's context-based, so it's only going to show that second level on each individual one. So when I go to customers, I won't see it, but when I click on sales, I'll see it. So I can build quick multi-level navigation using the navigation control. Great, and now I'm rendering that report inside of Access. So let's go sync that up to the server and see it running in the browser. So we can now sync it up. All the changes I do locally, I can test and work with locally and make sure I've got it the way I want it. Then I can sync it to the server, and then everyone will be able to have access to it. So we can refresh this and go take a look at our sales report. And all our reports are sent to the server as RDL. We render them on the server with SQL Server reports. So as with all SQL Server reports, you get a bunch of cool options as well. The ability to take a report, export it to PDF, export it to Word, and do a bunch of other interesting things like that. Great. So now we've got, in a few minutes, we've built up a simple little application that Joanna can use to track her sales.
Thank you, Ryan.
Great. So this is a very simple, small application. What I wanted to talk a little bit about is larger applications. We definitely found, from the feedback we got from 2007, that performance and data platform were the key pieces of feedback. Performance being moving data in and out of Access from SharePoint was slow when you got above 2,000 records. And from a data platform perspective, a lot of customers came back and said, well, I don't have referential integrity, I don't have data level validation, I don't have the things that I would expect from a database inside of SharePoint, so it's very hard for me to move my stuff up there. So we've got a bunch of great improvements in SharePoint 2010 from a platform level. We now have list relationships where you can have cascade deletes and you can have restrict inserts at the data level. So regardless of where you access it from, the web service, the OM, or the SharePoint UI, all of those will be respected. We have unique column constraints where you can say a column has to be unique. We have data level validation where you can put expressions on it at a data level to say this is the only kinds of valid data we express on a list and on an item. And we have the ability with Access to take the standard SharePoint validations like min, max numbers and required fields and plumb those all the way down to the data layer. And previously in SharePoint, if you had a field required but you went through the web service or the OM, you could kind of do whatever you wanted. Now with the Access lists, we have a special property that plumbs those rules all the way down. So no matter who accesses the data and what application touches it, those rules will apply no matter what. And on the scale side, we definitely saw that in Access, databases tend to be 5,000, 40,000, 50,000 records, not 1,000 or 2,000. So we needed a way to be able to allow larger record sets, but still be safe and reliable inside of SharePoint. We didn't want to be, we wanted to ensure that one bad query or one bad app can't affect the entire farm and won't block deployment. So we created an application server similar to Excel services on top of SharePoint that allows you to work with larger record sets. I'm going to show you a demo of that right now. So this database is a 40,000 record database, orders and line items. And I can go to my data sheet, which is bringing me line items. So it's going to go back to SharePoint. It's going to render 40,000 line items. Now you notice it was pretty fast to go to SharePoint and get 40,000 records. What we're doing in the background is we're chunking it up into 2,000 record chunks. So we're getting 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. We're stitching it up in our middle tier in memory, and now you're working against that memory. So you're not always going back to the SharePoint DB anymore until you make a change or make an edit. And now I can quickly go and sort. So I can say, okay, I want to really sort by unit price. And now I'm executing that sort against the cache. I'm not going back to SharePoint. So it's very fast to sort and work with data. And in the same case, if I want to filter, if I just want one particular product, I can pick that. And it'll do the full filtering for me very quickly. And this is actually the project data grid that we worked with the Microsoft project team to build. And it's a really neat data grid in that even though it's going to the server to get 40,000 records, you obviously don't need to display 40,000 records inside the browser. The browser would kind of go crazy with that much information jammed into the DOM. So they bring you down 200 records at a time for display. So if I navigate down in the middle, they're going to go request that batch of 200 records. And if I navigate further down, they'll get that batch. And they're always working and cleaning up and loading it in for you. So it's a very fast, rich experience to work with the data sheet without the load of getting all that data, but you can still work with large sets. We also brought the continuous form to the web in Access, and we've allowed page navigation on it. So in this case, you can see we've got 40,000 records, 4,000 pages. And navigating from the front to the end is pretty quickly, or even picking an arbitrary page in the middle and going to it is pretty fast. And this database also has the ability to do, like all the databases, simple UI logic that lets you drill down from an order into the details of that order, as well as show totals and have master-child relationships very quickly inside of Access. Plus, the back button works as you'd expect. We plumbed all that through with the navigation control, so you can navigate around in the common way, even though we're using Ajax for all the pages. So we're not actually refreshing any of these pages as we move around. We're just going and getting the content and bringing it in. But we plumb the back button through that so that you still get the browser experience that you would expect. I think the last thing I want to talk about before we bring up Mike to show a demo, one of our customers to show a demo of an app he built, is all this stuff is new stuff we're building. So it's new web forms, new web queries. A lot of the questions we get asked is, what about my older legacy apps or my older legacy forms, some of the stuff I built before? Or how do I deal with the fact that my apps have a lot of VBA and I'm not going to convert them all over to this? So what we do with client objects, which is forms and reports built in the client or link tables, that kind of thing, is we store them in SharePoint as a definition. So they won't run in the browser, but they'll still be stored in SharePoint. So when a client connects to that website, they'll synchronize down, they'll be able to run that application with full VBA, full client reports inside of Access. They just have an easy way to really deploy that and work with that. They don't have to have an ACCDB sitting around on a file share. It lives inside SharePoint. So it becomes a great way to deploy. And we really feel it becomes a great way as a first step. So you can move your application up, continue to run it in the Access client and get all those benefits. And for the stuff that you want to have in the browser, you can gradually start migrating those over by creating new objects. And you can still have a kind of mixed mode effect. We always think there's going to be a lot of stuff where you use VBA for heavy lifting, and that's not going to disappear. So this is a great way to kind of combine the best of both worlds.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So we're really fortunate to have Mike Matloop from Connolly Consulting come join us up on stage and show us the application he's built using the Access Technical Preview. Let's give a round of applause to Mike.
Testing. Okay. So when they asked me to come up here and give this demo, I didn't know Ryan was going to show you how easy it is to build this, and it's going to be totally unimpressive now. But so a little background. My name is Mike Matloop. I work for a company called Connolly Consulting. We are a recovery audit company, which basically means we're the good auditors. We're the ones that come into your company and find money where you've made payments that you shouldn't have or didn't get some discount. Not telecom auditing, but because of the business we're in, we get pretty much full copies of our clients' ERP systems, sales data, tons of data, and it's all stored in SQL. And so how I came to be here today is we actually use Access as the front end for our auditors because of its ability to be a great platform for rapid application development, non-compiled, just make the change, boom, it's in the hands of the auditor. And that front end's billions of rows of data. So because of the way we use it, we have about 100 Access developers in my shop, and I got introduced to the Access team, and in talking to them, they were showing me what's new, and well, I was really interested in that. They were like, "Hey, look at this other thing," and they showed me this, and it was intriguing. I was like, "Wow, there's a whole series of needs that we have in my company that, and we're a .NET, SQL, web services, SharePoint shop." That never get met because you can't invest in them. And I'm part of the decision maker. I am the major decision maker for what products we invest in and what things we service in our organization. And so when they showed me this, I was like, wow, that would be really a great way to just whip up some things that will never get attention otherwise. So brings me to where I am today. One of the major concerns in my organization, because we have healthcare data, because we have government, Department of Defense data, because we have all this data that we have to have such security walls around, is our security group. And I have a great department, and they're really, really judicious about managing security incidents and risk assessments. But they do all this stuff in Excel on a file system, or some Word documents to capture their interviews. And they never really had anything that made it easy for them to show the rest of the organization where we were having problems. These are the lines of business that you have to pay attention to, or these are the types of incidents that we're seeing. So I said, hey, this would be a great opportunity for me to whip something up for that group. And so this is the application I came up with. And I have to say that starting out the beta, beta 1, working with the product, it probably took me significantly longer to do this. But by the time I got to the build before here, it would have probably only taken me maybe 6 to 10 hours for this whole thing. So that's something to keep in mind as we go. So let me orient you to what you're looking at. Down the left-hand side is just simple list management. So these are all the lists that are used throughout the application. And I just put them there really quickly so as the business changes, as the type of security incidents that we're seeing change, my group can very easily just manage it right there. And all those forms, literally was like once we created the table, just click a form and it was there, drag it to the navigation pane, simple. So the other thing you're looking at in a second is what I created, just a start of a dashboard for them saying, what is the information that you need to see quickly? And so there's some basic, these are little access reports that are basically put into a subform control. To summarize, how many open tickets there are, what lines of business, where are the incidents happening, what divisions. And in addition, this normally wouldn't be on this form, I just put it here for demo purposes, but part of the application is I gave a, quote, anonymous way for people to report security incidents. So somebody would come in here, there'd be a link that would be out on some other website. They'd be able to click in and say, I saw this and you need to know about it. Once that data was added, it would actually show up on the dashboard down here. And this was, some playing around with combinations of UI macros and the name data macros that Ryan referred to before. And it was really easy to just say, okay, I am going to create an incident out of it. So when you click the Create Incident button, what it's basically doing is moving that data to my incidents table, so where it's actually being tracked. And then once that completes, it's going to take the line and it'll just disappear. Anybody know the Jeopardy song? There you go. Okay, so now that row that was there got moved to my incident table. Another quick part of it is just the risk assessment. And the risk assessment in my company, we're literally managing it. I have a spreadsheet. It's saying, here's a risk, here are the compensating controls, here's the things that we should be paying attention to. So it was really easy to model it just as a table. And then use some conditional styling and some sorting and a report to say, okay, well, now that we have all this stuff captured, we can then render it and say, okay, what are we paying attention to the things that we should be paying attention to? And so, high risk, high priority shows up at the top. Obviously not real data. So then we get down to the actual incident. So a security incident, when it happens, there's a lot of things that need to take place. Somebody needs to be notified. Sometimes there's interviews that have to take place. And so I tried to capture all that stuff in this form so they'd have one easy place to manage the information. So, these are all the lists, so they're capturing details so we can, analyze where things are happening. And then there's the incident. So this particular incident, I used my elevated access to delete all my previous security incidents. And I totally forgot that I used the data macro to log all the change events, so I got busted. So this position is they no longer allow me to write programs. Notification, so this is, who was told. And then, capture of an interview. So my director of security compliance came to me and he said, Mike, why'd you do it? And I said I thought it would be a bad example if they had a list of so many security incidents from the CIO. Shouldn't be breaking the rules that often, right? Second question was, can you teach me how to do that? And so one nice thing is, so as they're going through logging these security incidents, just slap the tab there, said, okay, related information, what other security incidents have I had? And they could easily just pull them up. And this row down here is the one that I moved in with that data macro. And it doesn't have all the fields filled out because I haven't gone and edited them, but you could see it kind of transitioned out of the report into the actual incident. The other data macro that we put in, we're kind of forgiving in my company, so we don't really call you a repeat offender until you do the same thing twice. And so the data macro we put in here is when a new incident is created, it actually checks to see, has Mike done this specific thing again? And if I had, you would see that I've repeated it once, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, so that you can, give me a hard time, basically. Now, one of the things about these types of solutions is there's kind of a wall around the site that it creates, so you can't really get information in and out of it. And that was kind of a struggle for me because I have this help desk system, right, where people call in, say crazy things, and the help desk people say, well, what are you doing? And all of a sudden they realize somebody's sharing their passwords or giving out their token to somebody else to use their laptop. And so that was kind of a challenge for me, is how do I manage the workflow out? And it finally dawned on me that a web browser control with some JavaScript, I can actually call, using the BCS to access the help desk system and directly to the web services for this site, I can actually move the data in and out. So obviously that's not going to work. I'm not connected to my office, but one way to kind of bridge your solutions. In addition, also building some other reports using other tools as well to get more analysis in. But all in all, tremendously easy, and I think you should all check it out.
Great, thanks, Mike, for coming up.
All right.
Appreciate it. I can skip slides. I love skipping lots of slides. Perfect. And that didn't really skip them. There we go. This is my favorite slide. It's something I always thought when I started building web apps after spending years in Access was, man, it should really be as easy as is in Access to bind stuff, get stuff going, and work with it. And I'm really excited to be able to bring this technology to you and be able to see Access as a product kind of move into the web world and kind of take its place, which is really exciting. So I just wanted to recap some of the stuff we showed you today and kind of the key messages. And one of them really is, it's very easy to build these things. It's so easy that people can maintain them after you've built them. So we definitely don't see it, you just unleashing people and people will figure it all out for themselves. There's still definitely a role for IT to play in terms of training and helping people get started with these things. But I found this during consulting as well, is once you give them a little bit and teach them, they'll just start running. And once they learn how to do some queries, some reports, they'll get a long distance before they require any help. And it'll really help the business in terms of people will be able to get the jobs done that they need in the time fashion they need to without having to require as many resources from central IT. And the other thing that I want to get across is we always built this to be a hosted service at Microsoft. So from the beginning of the release, we thought of us rolling out Access services to SharePoint Online to hundreds of thousands and millions of users. And we thought about that as we were building in these features in terms of what parts of Access we would bring to the web that we felt we could bring in a safe and scalable way. And that really permeates all of our decision-making process and the features that we showed today. We really wanted to make it so that end users or business users wouldn't be able to create things that would inadvertently take down your server or negatively affect the performance of your server. But still the flexibility and the speed of development to build the things that they wanted. And we felt we've spent a lot of time trying to strike that balance. And we'd love to get feedback. It's a V1 for us for Access Services. We'd love you to try out the Beta 2 on the server and on the client and give us some feedback, and we're looking forward to that. So I'll zip it over, and if you have any questions, we can just start taking them. And don't forget to fill the things up. Go ahead. So the question was, do you see any specific cases of like low-lying fruit applications that people might use? I think Access has kind of had two scenarios since the beginning of the product in 1992, and that's a landing pad for data. So the place that you go to bring a bunch of disparate sources of data together and do stuff with. And that's still very much a part of the Access client, except now you can manage that in SharePoint but still run it in the client. The kind of sweet spot we see for the Access services applications is department-level tracking applications. The kinds of things that you do with a bunch of Word files or a bunch of Excel files, which classically people would do in Access. The challenge is as organizations have moved away from land-based stuff and don't want things all over the file share, and with compliance and regulatory effects, you can't have tens of thousands of MDBs all over your network and not know where the data is, what data is in them, who's used them last. You don't have a lot of information or metrics on that. And really what our goal with this is to allow people to continue to build those departmental level tracking apps, but have them centrally managed through SharePoint. So the data is in one place, it's backed up, it's stored. You have the ability to get a window in on it, how it's being used, and control who can view it and who cannot view it. Go ahead. So the question is, once I've published, and what happens with my HTTP file? Do I have to keep going back to SharePoint and opening it up? We actually keep a local copy of it. So once you open an Access, we'll put an ACCDB on your desktop or wherever you set, and that's a connected Access database. So we will store all of that SharePoint data locally, which allows you to have much better performance against the server as well. So what we do is we store a local copy, we just check for differences. So if you leave that database for a week, you come back to your desktop, you open it, we're going to hit the server and say, hey, what changed since last week? Get the new forms, get any new data that's changed, and then sync anything you have back up again. So that way you're still working locally, except you can have the connected experience of the web. Go ahead, over. I can only see your hand. Yes. So the question was, SharePoint has a rich text field. How do we handle that in Access? And we do support the SharePoint rich text field. So in Access, you can set a memo field to be rich text, and you get the rich text experience in the browser and in the client as well. In 2007, we brought the attachment field, and the other field that we brought in 2010 is calculated columns. So we now allow you to do data-level calculated columns inside Access that merge up to SharePoint and become SharePoint calculated columns. Go ahead, the back. So the question was about improvements to the Access runtime. So if you're not familiar with the runtime, it's the ability for you to wrap up Access into a package and deploy it. The people who are running it don't need to install Access. They'll get enough of Access running on that machine that the app will run. It's a great way to do large deployments, or if you do CD-based deployments, you can use the runtime. The big improvement to the runtime this release is that we're shipping it along with the product. So in past releases, we've shipped it outside of the product cycle, and it's been a challenge for us in that we'll release the product and it takes us a while to get the runtime out in all the different languages. So we're now shipping that simultaneously with it. That's the main change for runtime this release. So his question around, in 2007, a couple of the features we deprecated, one of them was user-level security. So when Access had its own management for user-level security, our challenge there was it wasn't as secure as we wanted it to be. And so we ended up taking it out of the product, and really our move bit by bit is over to SharePoint, the SharePoint security model. There isn't any changes in the security model inside Access. An existing MDB will continue to support user-level permissions, so the apps will continue to work, but you can't make new applications with that model anymore and distribute the runtime with them. Go ahead.
What about an Access Data Project?
So an Access Data Project was the ability to take an Access database and have it directly connected to SQL Server. And we had a lot of questions around, why did you go to SharePoint, why didn't you go to SQL? And I think one of the main things that came down for us was we put out Access Data Projects in Access 2000 and then again in Access XP. What we found when we really started seeing them in use was, in larger organizations, IT departments, for obvious reasons, didn't want to give all of their users access to SQL. They didn't want to say, okay, hey, anyone that wants to make a SQL database, go party on our SQL servers. And we saw a real pushback from those organizations in terms of we don't really have the support mechanisms and the user interfaces to do sharing and permissions and allow people safely to access SQL databases. So we didn't see the wide adoption we were hoping for ADPs. And our move to SharePoint has been more around SharePoint already has end user provisioning, already has site creation, it already encourages contributor level people to make things, and we're kind of dovetailing in on that. So there hasn't been any major changes in ADPs. We continue to support them.
So if you have an ADP already,
Yes.
and you want to move parts of it to SharePoint, is it possible to have the web experience for forms and then still have the query to the SQL Server?
It's not in this release. So the question was, if I have an ADP connected to SQL, can I start building web forms on top of it? The web forms will only in this release work for the lists inside the SharePoint site you create. Any other linked stuff will work in the client, but it won't work in the browser. Go ahead. So the question was, if I have an Access 2007 app that has some VBA, can I move that up? So you can move up the data and the application definition. The application will continue to run in Access client, but it'll be stored in the server. So if you go to the browser, you can't run the reports and do stuff in the browser. You can open it up in Access and kind of manage it through SharePoint. You'll have to do some adjustment to your data to make sure your data matches to SharePoint. VBA code at this point doesn't run in the server because it's raw code. We really needed more of a sandbox approach to allow you to do things we knew would work well. But VBA will continue to run on the client, continue to be supported in the client for all of Office. Definitely. So this question was, could I have a hybrid where I have some web forms working against SharePoint lists and also want to go into the client, connect to other external data sources, and have other kinds of forms totally? So we're storing all the definition inside SharePoint, which means your link tables, your client forms will get round trip back and forth and run in the client. So you can have the kind of best of both experiences. Part of your application can live in the browser for the people that need it there, and the more admin stuff can kind of run in the client. We even have expressions that allow you to pick. So we have an expression called isClient that will let you know in code whether you're in a client or in the browser. And you can actually have a different experience in your application depending on what context you're in. So if there's forms or admin screens that you don't need in the web, you can have the same button go two different directions depending on what you want. Yes, the question was, if I want to have a completely SharePoint-driven app, do I have to use only the macros? And yes, in order for the web forms and the web reports to only work with macros, the UI macros and the data macros. And we're really hoping that we've got the right set of features in those to build the rich kinds of apps that you'd expect on the web. And definitely, if there's some more heavy lifting, you might have to go to VBA in the client. Go ahead. So in what context? Okay, great. So her question was around security context and macros. So in Access 2003, it was a bit of a nightmare to kind of click through to get past the macro security. You get a lot of pop-ups, and people would have to go disable macros completely, which is not a good thing. In 2007, we made some improvements in that we made some macro actions safe and some macro actions unsafe, depending on whether they could call code or run code. And that allowed you, with the templates we shipped in 2007, to run completely in untrusted mode. And all the stuff that we're doing for the web now is all running in untrusted mode as well. So the templates that we're going to ship that have UI macros and data macros run in an untrusted environment. So you don't have to enable the content or put them in a trusted location. You can just run them. The actions that we chose are safe actions. Go ahead. So the question is, can I have forms or reports to go against any SharePoint list or just the ones created inside that Access site? For this release, it's just inside that one Access site. What we've seen, and we have a demo of this on Thursday in our deep dive talk, is some developers have started writing event receivers on top of those lists because they're standard SharePoint lists, and use that to move data back and forth in a more automatic way. So there's a lot of options you can do on top of it. For this release, then we really want to focus on getting the departmental tracking apps right. We definitely see in the future releases the power of being able to connect to all sorts of different parts of data. I mean, that's been Access's specialty since the beginning, and that's definitely the roadmap for us, is to allow you in the browser to connect to BCS, connect to SQL, connect to all sorts of different sources. Go ahead. So the question was, does Access have a field type to consume taxonomies in SharePoint 2010? It doesn't. The list of fields we support are the basic ones. There are some more complicated SharePoint constructs like content types and some of the taxonomy stuff that we just don't support in this release. It's definitely something we're very interested in now. Go ahead.
Follow up on your forums and talking to SharePoint lists response. If you're designing your client-side app and you explicitly call out SharePoint lists as part of that application, when you publish it to SharePoint, is that link can remain?
Yes, so the question was, if I've got an Access client app that's linking to a bunch of different SharePoint sites and I publish it, what happens to those links? So we store those links as link definitions. And so if you open up that application in a different client, you'll get all those links. In the browser, you'll only be able to access the stuff in that site, so Forms won't be able to build on top of that. But you'll save all that stuff for you.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going. How there's lists in that site that might already exist before you publish.
So when you publish, basically what happens is we create a brand new subweb.
Okay.
So when you tell it the site collection or the site you want, we'll create a subweb underneath of it. And it's a completely self-contained SharePoint site that contains all of our lists in it.
Can we create a new list in that site and then link it through the web app or through the
So you can create, once you publish to SharePoint, you can completely author SharePoint schema inside Access. So you can make new lists in Access, you can edit the schema of your lists in Access. You can also do that for any WSS list, so not just Access Services lists. Any V4 or the SharePoint 2010 list, you can connect Access to it and you can actually change the schema for it. You can add new fields, you can delete fields, you can do all that stuff as well. So that's all plumbed in, so you can manage it once you've published it through Access too. Go ahead over there in the back. Okay, we'll go all the way over there first. So the question was, they have an application that has lists and document libraries, and is there any connection or relationship between those? I believe you can connect to document libraries as link tables in Access, and you can integrate it through that way. Since the document library is not a native Access table, you wouldn't be able to use the web forms against it, but you'd be able to do it in a client. Go ahead. Definitely. So the question was, when I did my demo going through the continuous form, it was a little clunky to type in a random page and go to it, which I kind of just did for the demo. But the question was, could you do a more full-featured search? And yes. So the templates that we're shipping for 2010 have full-feature search in them. It's a very simple macro to write, which I'm actually going to show in the talk tomorrow at 10:30. One of the macros I show is an actual search macro. So you can pick the fields in the database you want to search, and people can type in a search, click it, and it'll just filter the record set down using Access macros. Go ahead. Gracefully. So the question was, if I have advanced permissions on my lists, or after I publish my application, I go to a specific list and put advanced permissions on. So I say, he can see this list, but he can't see this list. What happens in the Access client? So the Access client talks to SharePoint through the standard SharePoint web services, all the publicly documented ones, and there's no special web services. And everything you do is in the context of you. So when you open up an Access, I happen to be connected to the network already through my domain, but normally if I was connected to SharePoint Online, I'd be prompted for credentials when I tried to download that database. And then those credentials are used to do all my actions. So you can have a list that only 2 people out of the 10 in the company can see. If anyone else tries to run a form against that list, it'll show up without any data. If they try to open up that list, it won't show any data. So all the data in SharePoint, the same level of security is all mapped down in Access and into the Access Services applications. Go ahead. So the question was, how do I take an Access database, if I understand it correctly, and be able to save that into a SharePoint document library? Okay, and you want to save those documents up to? That's a good question. You should definitely come ask me afterwards. I can find someone that can answer that. I don't know that offhand. That's a great question. Go ahead. Definitely. The question was, do we get our user security back now that we have SharePoint? And yes, that was part of our design goal. I think we realized that it was better for SharePoint to stay in the business of the security business, and we could kind of leverage that. And one of the reasons why I went with SharePoint was it has all these platform-level features that, as Access, we could leverage, and one of them is users and security. Not only is it easy to share the application, it's really easy to permission it, and those permissions map all the way down. And we don't have to be in the business of respecting those. We just use the standard web service calls and the standard ways to connect with SharePoint, and that kind of happens under the covers for us, which is great. So the question was where to get more resources and how do you start to convert your applications over. So when Beta 2 comes out in November, we're going to have a bunch of stuff on our blog. So our blog is definitely a great resource, blogs.msdn.com/access to get all this stuff. We also in the product have a compatibility checker. So you can take any database you want, you can run the compatibility checker, and it'll tell you what is wrong with your tables that you have to adjust to get them into SharePoint. So that's a great way to try it out. Great. Well, thanks so much for coming. It's been great to be able to show you.